It started as an ordinary night until an entire high school volleyball team vanished into thin air, leaving behind only questions. For 30 years, their disappearance baffled everyone. Then, deep in the shadowy woods nearby, something shocking was discovered that turned the entire mystery upside down. What happened next will send a shockwave down your spine. It was a cool Friday evening in October 1990. The sky was gray, and light rain tapped gently against the windows of the National Sports Arena in New York. But inside the arena's gym, the air was filled with noise and excitement. The crowd cheered wildly as the Hillcrest High School girls volleyball team celebrated their biggest win of the season. Coach Henderson smiled proudly as the team hugged and laughed. The Hillcrest Lions had never made it this far before. Seniors like Myra Thompson, Lily Chen, and Carmen Diaz felt like champions. News cameras flashed, reporters asked questions, parents clapped from the stands. The team, dressed in red and gold jerseys, waved to their fans as they headed to their van, excited to go home and celebrate. "Myra, we did it," Lily said, grabbing her friend's hand. "I still can't believe it," Myra said, smiling. "It's like a dream." Coach Henderson climbed into the front seat of the old white van. The girls piled in, tired but full of joy. They drove off into the night, headlights glowing through the dark forest roads. But that was the last time anyone saw them. By morning, panic spread through the town. The team never made it home. Their parents called the police. The school was in shock. The news flashed: Hillcrest High volleyball team missing. Search teams were sent out. Helicopters flew over the roads. Forest trails were checked. But the van had vanished, like it had been swallowed by the earth. For days, people hoped they would be found. But weeks passed, then months. The search was called off. Some believed the team ran away. Others feared something worse. And then everyone moved on. But deep in the heart of the woods, where the trees whispered secrets and no one dared to go, something waited, something buried, and 30 years later, it would be found. It was a warm summer day, 30 years after the Hillcrest volleyball team vanished. A group of hikers walked along a narrow trail in a deep forest just outside of New York. They were laughing, carrying backpacks and water bottles. Birds chirped in the trees above, and the sun peeked through the thick leaves. One of the hikers, 19-year-old Kevin Marks, was the first to notice something strange. "Hey," he said, pointing to something under a big tree. "Do you see that?" The others came closer. A giant tree had fallen years ago, its roots reaching high into the air. Underneath it, covered in vines and moss, was a shape, a large, rusty shape. Kevin pulled back a branch. His eyes widened. "It's a van," he whispered. The others gasped. The van was old and beat up, with shattered windows and faded white paint. Nature had almost swallowed it whole, but something about it looked familiar. Kevin took a photo and posted it online. Within hours, the post went viral. "Abandoned van found in forest. Could it be the Hillcrest team?" The police arrived the next morning. Yellow tape was stretched around the area. Officers, detectives, and dogs surrounded the scene. For the first time in 30 years, hope and fear returned to the town. Detective Sarah Lawson had studied the Hillcrest case in school. Now she stood in front of the van, heart pounding. "This is it," she said softly. "This is where it all ended." Forensic teams opened the van doors slowly. Inside were old gym bags, a broken whistle, and pieces of red and gold fabric, just like the jerseys the girls wore. Then came the discovery that made everyone go silent. 3 sets of bones lay in the back seat, curled up together. They had been there for years. And then, tucked between the seats, was something else. A notebook, its cover dirty and torn. Detective Lawson picked it up carefully. On the front, written in faded ink, were the words, "Property of Myra Thompson." She stared at it, chills crawling up her arms. "Myra," she whispered, "you were trying to tell us something." The investigation had finally begun again, and this time, the truth would not stay buried. Detective Lawson sat in her quiet office late at night. The old notebook lay in front of her on the desk. Its pages were yellow and fragile. Some were torn, others smudged with dirt. But the writing was still there. She opened it slowly. October 12th, 1990. The first page read in neat handwriting. If anyone ever finds this, please know, we didn't just disappear. Something terrible happened to us. Myra Thompson Lawson held her breath. She flipped to the next page. We were laughing, talking about the game. Coach was quiet, driving us through the forest road. Then the van jerked. It went off the road and into the trees. We screamed. It hit something and stopped hard. The lights went out. The engine died. We were stuck. Lawson's heart beat faster as she read. Coach Henderson went outside to get help, but he never came back. The next pages were filled with fear. It's been hours. We're hungry and cold. Carmen's crying. Lily has a cut on her leg. I keep writing to stay calm. Detectives and forensic experts kept studying the van. They confirmed it had been driven off-road on purpose. It wasn't an accident. Someone had taken them there. Outside the van, searchers found something else. A trap door, hidden under fallen leaves. It led down into the earth. A small root cellar, cold and dark. Inside were scratches on the wall. Names. Lily, Myra, Carmen. And one word carved deep. Help. Meanwhile, Lawson kept reading the notebook. Someone came back that night, but it wasn't Coach. It was a man we didn't know. He had a flashlight. His face was dirty. He smiled like he was happy we were scared. He said, "No one's coming for you." Lawson closed the notebook. Her hands were shaking. Who was this man? Who had taken those girls? And why? She stood up and looked at the old map on her wall. The place where the van was found was far off any known trail. It was almost like someone didn't want it to ever be found. But now it had. And the darkness that had waited for 30 years was finally waking up. The news of the van's discovery spread fast. Hillcrest was no longer a quiet town. Reporters stood outside the police station. Former students gathered at the high school, leaving flowers and letters by the old gym. People were crying. Some were angry, and some were scared. Inside the police station, Detective Lawson met with her team. "We know the van didn't crash," she said, pointing to photos on a board. "It was driven off-road, on purpose. We have 3 skeletons. We're still running DNA tests. But we believe they're Myra, Carmen, and Lily." An officer raised his hand. "What about the others?" Lawson nodded slowly. "That's the question. There were 9 girls on that van. 6 are still missing." Silence filled the room. They began digging deeper. Old files were pulled from dusty shelves. Interviews from 1990 were replayed. Witnesses were contacted again. One name kept coming up. Martin Caney. He had worked at the school as a janitor in 1990. Quiet, strange. Fired just 2 weeks before the girls disappeared. He'd had problems with the law. Nothing big, but enough to make people nervous. Back then, no one had looked too closely. There was no proof. No reason to suspect him. Now things felt different. Lawson flipped through the notebook again. He kept saying things like, "You belong to me now," and "No one cares about you." We cried. We begged. He laughed. Myra Thompson. She stared at the words. They didn't just tell a story. They screamed for justice. They checked Martin Kane's old address. It had been abandoned for years, but what they found next made everyone's skin crawl. In a shed behind the house, hidden under floorboards, they found items that belonged to the girls. A Hillcrest Lions jersey, a gold hairband, a shoe with the name Carmen written inside. The walls had carvings too. Dates, words, and something darker. Detective Lawson whispered to herself. He kept their things, like trophies. Now they had enough to move forward. An arrest warrant was issued. Martin Caney had vanished from town years ago, but now it was time to find him and make him answer for what happened in those woods. The sky was dark with clouds as officers moved out across the countryside. Roads were blocked. Helicopters flew low. Photos of Martin Kane were on every TV screen and phone in town. He was now the prime suspect in the Hillcrest case. Detective Lawson stood outside the police station with a photo in her hand. Caney's eyes stared back at her from the faded picture. Cold, distant, and hollow. "He's out there," she said. "He's been hiding for 30 years. But he made mistakes, and we're going to find him." She wasn't wrong. Back at the crime scene, search teams had gone deeper into the woods around the van. They found more clues, pieces of clothing, a silver whistle with Coach Henderson's name on it, and a torn photo of the team. But the most haunting thing came from a small wooden box buried near the root cellar. Inside was another notebook, smaller, sloppier handwriting. This one didn't belong to Myra. It was written by Martin Kane. They cried a lot in the beginning. Some screamed my name, some prayed. I told them they were lucky. They belonged to me now. Detective Lawson's hands shook as she turned the pages. The words were wild, angry, sick. She whispered, "He kept records, like a diary." The deeper she read, the more twisted it became. They tried to escape once. I had to show them who was in charge. And then, Myra wouldn't stop writing. I told her no more paper, but she hid it. Clever girl. Lawson's eyes widened. Myra had written the truth and hidden it for the world to find. It was her voice, her bravery that had reopened this case. Just then a call came in. "We've got a hit," said an officer. "Martin Kane was spotted in a small town 3 hours from here. He's working under a fake name. Lives alone near the woods." Lawson grabbed her jacket. "We move now." The cars sped off into the rain. The chase had begun. And soon they would face the man who had stolen so many lives. The man who thought the forest would keep his secret forever. But the forest had spoken, and it wanted justice. The police cars moved fast through the wet roads. Rain tapped on the windshields as the wipers swiped back and forth. Inside the lead car, Detective Lawson sat quietly, reading Martin Kane's notebook one more time. Every line was chilling. Every word felt like a punch to the chest, but it also gave them clues. "He's alone," she said to the officer beside her. "Still near the woods, still hiding in the dark." 3 hours later, they reached a small town called Woodpine. It was quiet. One gas station, one diner, and thick woods all around. Just beyond the edge of town stood a tiny house, old, broken, and forgotten. That's where they believed Martin Kane was living. Lawson looked through binoculars. A single light glowed inside the house. Smoke came from the chimney. The place looked like it hadn't changed in years. "This is it," she said. The team moved in, slow and careful, guns raised, flashlights on. Lawson stepped onto the creaky porch. She knocked. No answer. She knocked again. "Martin Kane, this is the police. Open the door." Still nothing. Then slowly the door opened. A man stood there, tall, thin, with white hair and a face full of shadows. His eyes were cold and empty. "Yes?" he said, like nothing was wrong. Lawson stared at him. "Martin Kane?" He tilted his head. "I go by Marvin King now. You must be mistaken." But Lawson wasn't mistaken. She knew that face. She had seen the photos, and the look in his eyes matched every nightmare described in Myra's notebook. "You're under arrest," she said, "for the disappearance and death of the Hillcrest High girls." Caney didn't move. For a second, everything was silent. Then he smiled. A slow, creepy smile. "You finally found me," he whispered. Officers rushed in and cuffed him. As they searched the house, they found more. Old newspapers about the missing team, pieces of clothing, and even a box filled with teeth and hair. Souvenirs from long ago. Detective Lawson stepped back outside, heart pounding. They had him. After 30 years, they had the monster. But the hardest part wasn't over, because now it was time to learn everything he had done and uncover the full horror hidden behind that smile. Martin Kane sat in the cold metal chair at the police station, hands cuffed, eyes staring straight ahead. He didn't blink. He didn't speak. He just waited. Detective Lawson entered the room, holding both notebooks, Myra's and Kane's. She placed them on the table between them. "You know what these are," she said calmly. Caney didn't look down. "She was a clever one," he said softly, "always writing, always hoping someone would find her words." Lawson clenched her jaw. "We have your things, your notes, the girl's remains, your trophies. It's over." Caney smirked. "You think you know everything? You've only scratched the surface." Lawson leaned forward. "Then tell me what happened that night." There was a long pause. Then Caney began to speak. "I waited for them. I knew their route. I slashed the tires of the backup van, So they'd take the old one? I knew that road. I knew where to stop them. He spoke with no emotion, as if telling a boring story. They screamed when I appeared. They thought I was there to help. Then I pulled the van off the road and took the keys. Coach came after me. He didn't get far. Lawson flinched. What did you do to him? Caney didn't answer. I led the girls into the woods, told them it was for safety, but they were never meant to leave. He smiled again. I made them sleep in the cellar. I gave them water, at first. Then I took it away. I like seeing who gave up first. Myra, she never gave up. She kept writing in secret, even when I tried to break her spirit. Lawson's hands curled into fists. Why, Martin? Why those girls? They were happy, loud, full of light. I wanted to put that light out. The room went silent. Lawson stood. You'll never see the sky again. As she left the room, Caney's smile faded for the first time. Outside, the town was still morning. Candles burned for the girls. Flowers covered the old gym steps. And in the school hallway, photos of the volleyball team still hung. Now their voices were heard again. Thanks to Myra, thanks to truth. But one question still remained. What happened to the other 6 girls? Detective Lawson couldn't sleep. Martin Kane had confessed to kidnapping the team. He admitted to taking the life coach Henderson and keeping the girls. Locked in the cellar, but only 3 bodies had been found. There were 9 girls on that van. 6 were still missing. Lawson stood in the evidence room, staring at the names carved into the cellar wall. Myra, Carmen, Lily, but not the others. No Nicole, no Hannah, no Rachel, no Tara, no Jasmine, no Emily. She picked up Myra's notebook again and flipped to the final pages. One line stood out, written in shaky handwriting. He took them one by one, said they were being set free, but they never came back. Lawson's stomach twisted. She called her team together early the next morning. We're missing something, she said. Caney didn't bury the others with the van. He said he set them free. We need to go back, search everything again. They returned to the forest, this time with a bigger team, dogs, drones, ground scanners, and shovels. The area around the root cellar was dug up. Every fallen tree, every pile of rocks, every hidden space was searched. Then one of the dogs began barking near a mossy hill. A team rushed over. It wasn't a hill, it was a mound. They dug slowly, and there, beneath the soft earth, was a wooden door. Another cellar. This one was deeper, darker, and filled with horror. Inside, they found 6 wooden boxes. Each had a name burned into the top. Nicole, Hannah, Rachel, Tara, Jasmine, Emily. When they opened them, they found what was left of the missing girls. Bones wrapped in cloth, each holding something personal, a bracelet, a volleyball medal, a torn page from a school yearbook. Detective Lawson stood at the edge of the cellar, tears in her eyes. They were here all along, she whispered. He never let them go. The whole town went silent that night when the news broke. Parents sobbed, old classmates held hands, and candles burned for each name. But even in the darkness, there was something powerful. Truth. The truth had finally come out, and because of it, the girls were no longer missing. They were found, they were remembered, and they were honored. The discovery of the second cellar shook everyone. The town grieved again, but Detective Lawson felt a new urgency. There was one last mystery left. Myra's notebook hinted at something more, a secret she wanted to share, but never got to finish. Back at the police station, Lawson spread the notebook pages across her desk, careful to preserve every word. She read the final entries, written in fading ink. I don't know how much longer I can write. Martin watches us all the time now. But I found something in the cellar, something he didn't know about. Lawson's eyes widened as she read on. There's a small hole behind a loose stone. I saw it when I was hiding. Maybe it leads outside. Maybe it's a way to escape. Lawson grabbed a flashlight and called the forensic team. We need to search the cellar again. Look for the hole Myra wrote about. The team returned to the root cellar near the van. They carefully examined every wall and stone. Behind a cracked rock, they found it. A small tunnel, hidden and narrow, just big enough for someone to crawl through. Lawson's heart pounded. Could the girls have tried to escape through this tunnel? They sent a camera through the dark passage. It showed a long underground path, ending at a small opening covered by brush. More digging revealed the exit. It led to a shallow stream just outside the forest. Lawson smiled sadly. They tried. They really tried. But there were no signs the girls ever made it far. The tunnel had been their last hope. She looked back at the notebook one last time. Myra had been brave enough to write the truth, brave enough to fight, even when she was trapped. The notebook was not just a record of fear. It was a story of hope, a story of survival. And now it was the key to the past and the future. The news about the tunnel and the girls' bravery spread quickly. The whole town of Hillcrest felt a mix of sadness and relief. The story of the volleyball team was no longer a mystery. It was a story of survival, courage, and truth. Detective Lawson watched as the community came together. At the old high school gym, families, friends, and neighbors gathered to remember the girls. There were tears and hugs. Candles flickered in the evening breeze. Stories were shared about each girl, their laughter, their dreams, and their love for volleyball. The mayor spoke to the crowd. We will never forget Myra, Carmen, Lily, Nicole, Hannah, Rachel, Tara, Jasmine, and Emily. Their lives were stolen too soon, but their spirits live on in us all. Lawson stood quietly, thinking about how far the town had come. The darkness of 1990 was slowly fading, replaced by light and hope. But healing wasn't easy. For many, the scars ran deep. Counselors and support groups started meeting in schools and churches. People learned to talk about their pain, to share their fears, to help each other. Lawson found herself visiting the volleyball court where the girls had once played. The nets were old, the lines faded, but it still felt alive. She thought about Myra's notebook, the voice that had kept the story alive. One day, Lawson planned to create a memorial for the team, a place where everyone could remember not just the tragedy, but the strength and love those girls had shown. As the sun set over Hillcrest, the town took a collective breath. The nightmare was over. But the story, their story, would never be forgotten. Weeks passed since Martin Kane's arrest. The trial was set to begin, and the town of Hillcrest was preparing for a flood of memories and emotions. Detective Lawson spent long hours going over evidence, preparing for court, but she couldn't help thinking about the families. How they felt knowing the man responsible was finally caught, but the pain would never truly leave. At the courthouse, survivors' families and friends filled the seats. Some clutched Myra's notebook tightly, others held photos of their lost loved ones. Outside, reporters shouted questions, trying to capture every moment. Among the crowd, Lawson noticed a woman quietly crying. She was young, with bright eyes full of sadness. She approached Lawson after the hearing. "I'm Rachel's sister," the woman said softly. "Thank you for finding the truth." Lawson nodded. "We couldn't have done it without Myra's notebook. She was brave." The woman wiped her tears. "I wish I could have known her." That moment reminded Lawson of how real the story was, not just names in a notebook or faces in photos, but real people with hopes, dreams, and families. The trial began, and Martin Kane sat silent in the courtroom. His eyes never met those of the families or the judge. When witnesses testified, Lawson watched as the pieces of the story came together: the kidnapping, the torture, the escape attempts, and the final horrors of that dark cellar. Every detail was painful but necessary. After hours of testimony, the court was silent. The jury left to decide. For Lawson and the town, waiting felt like another kind of torture. Would justice be served? Would the nightmare finally end? Or would the scars of 1990 stay with them forever? The courtroom was packed, every seat filled. Some people stood in the back, holding their breath. Cameras outside the courthouse captured the moment as if the whole country had paused to listen. Detective Lawson sat in the front row, her hands tightly folded in her lap. Next to her sat Myra's parents, who had waited 30 long years for this day. The judge entered, the jury returned. 12 men and women, their faces tired and serious, handed a folded slip of paper to the court clerk. The room fell into a heavy silence. The clerk cleared her throat. We, the jury, find the defendant, Martin Kane, guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in quiet sobs. Some cried out, others whispered prayers, but most just held each other, finally breathing after holding in pain for so long. Kane sat motionless. No emotion, no regret. The judge's voice rang clear. For the kidnapping, torture, and murder of 9 girls from Hillcrest High School in 1990, this court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lawson stood slowly. Justice, at last. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like something else. Relief, maybe. Or a door closing after years of darkness. Outside, the town waited. When the verdict was read aloud over the news, church bells rang. People lit candles at the memorial statue being built near the old volleyball court. Myra's name was carved at the top, along with the others. Beneath it, the words, they were not forgotten, they were not lost, they were loved. That night, a vigil was held. Thousands stood under the stars, holding candles high. A recording of Myra's last journal entry was read aloud by her sister. If someone finds this, tell them we tried. Tell them we were strong. And tell them not to be afraid. Even in the dark, there's always someone looking for the light. Lawson closed her eyes. For the first time in years, the town of Hillcrest slept in peace. But Myra's words would never fade. They had lit a path through the darkness, and the world had followed. Weeks after the trial, the root cellar near the van was sealed off. But before it was closed forever, Detective Lawson asked to visit one last time. She needed to feel the silence the girls had lived in. She needed to understand what they had gone through, not as an officer, but as a human being. She stepped down into the dark, narrow space. The air was thick with age and sorrow. The wooden beams creaked. The walls still held the scratches, carvings, and marks the girls had left behind. Lawson ran her fingers over the rough stone, stopping where the names were etched. Myra, Carmen, Lily. She knelt down and traced each name gently, whispering them. She found something she hadn't noticed before. On the far wall, under the dirt and moss, were faint lines. Lawson pulled out her flashlight and shined it closer. There were more carvings, but these weren't just names. They were dates, a list of days marked by scratches like a desperate way to count time. One mark for each day. Lawson's eyes filled with tears. They had kept track. Even when they were scared, even when they were starving. They had counted the days hoping to be found. Next to the last date, another word had been scratched deep into the stone. Hope. She stood slowly, her chest heavy with emotion. That word, scratched by tired, shaking hands, was what carried them. It was what helped Myra write, what helped Carmen sing quietly in the dark, what helped Lily whisper bedtime stories when the others cried. Lawson stepped out into the light, her eyes adjusting. A news reporter waited at the edge of the clearing. Detective Lawson, is it true they left messages down there? Lawson nodded. Yes, she said. Messages of strength, of fear, of hope. Back in town, the memorial statue was nearly finished. Families helped place flowers around it. Students from Hillcrest High painted a mural of the girls in their volleyball uniforms, all smiling, full of life. Inside the school library, Myra's notebook was placed in a glass case. Not to be forgotten. Not ever. The town was healing. But the cellar, the carvings, and the quiet echo of voices long gone. They would remain a part of Hillcrest's heart forever. Though Martin Kane was behind bars, questions still echoed through Hillcrest like wind through the trees. Why did he do it? What turned him into someone who could hurt 9 innocent girls? Detective Lawson sat across from Dr. Emily Borden, a criminal psychologist from New York City who had studied men like Kane before. She flipped through Kane's psychological profile, frowning. Kane showed signs of detachment from a young age, Dr. Borden explained. He had no empathy, no ability to feel guilt. He was careful, calculating, and deeply disturbed. Lawson leaned forward. But why target the volleyball team? Dr. Borden sighed. Because they were everything he wasn't. Joyful, talented, full of dreams. In his eyes, that made them dangerous. He needed to control something, someone, and once he did, he couldn't stop. Lawson thought back to Kane's chilling words in the interrogation room. I wanted to put that light out. It made sense now. He had lived in the shadows his whole life, watching others live freely. He'd felt powerless, invisible. The girls became his way of feeling powerful. Twisted, evil power. But even monsters had weaknesses, and Kane's weakness was Myra. She was the spark, Borden said. Her writing, her strength, her refusal to break. It exposed him. Even after death, she was louder than him. Lawson nodded slowly. She turned his secret into a story the whole world would hear. Back at the station, new mail was arriving daily. Letters from people across the country. Survivors, mothers, teachers, students. They all wrote to say one thing. Thank you. Thank you for telling the story. Thank you for giving those girls a voice. Lawson opened one letter from a teenage girl in California. It read, I read about Myra. I'm not as brave as her, but I want to be. I hope one day, if I'm ever scared, I'll remember her words. Even in the dark, there's always someone looking for the light. Lawson wiped her eyes. Justice had been served. The mystery had been solved. But Myra had done something greater than that. She had planted courage in others. In silence, in fear, in hunger, she had written, and now her words were saving lives. Even after Kane's arrest and the town's healing, there were still whispers in the wind. Rumors that something else had been out there in those woods. Some believed Kane hadn't acted alone. Others thought the forest itself held secrets too dark to understand. Detective Lawson didn't put much faith in rumors, but one detail continued to bother her. On the day the van was discovered, the hikers had mentioned something strange. Footprints, old, barely visible. But they were there, and they hadn't belonged to the girls or Kane. She went back to the reports. Sure enough, the hikers had marked the location. The prints led east, deeper into the forest, away from the van, toward a rocky ridge. No one had searched that far before, not until now. Lawson called in a small team. Quiet, careful. They didn't want the media following them this time. They moved through thick brush, stepping over twisted roots and ducking under heavy branches. The deeper they went, the darker it became. The forest seemed to swallow the sunlight. After nearly 2 hours of hiking, they reached the ridge. There, behind a wall of brambles, they found it. An old hunting cabin. Abandoned, broken, covered in moss. But it wasn't empty. Inside, they found a dusty lantern, a pile of torn blankets, and a metal box filled with newspaper clippings. All about the Hillcrest team's disappearance. Lawson's heart raced. She picked up one article. The edges were burned. A name was scribbled across it. M.K. Martin Kane, she whispered. But then her eyes dropped to another note inside the box. A different handwriting. He wasn't alone. That changed everything. Lawson stepped outside, staring at the cabin. Was there another person? Another monster? Someone still out there? Back at the station, she ordered a sweep of the entire forest. This isn't over, she told her team. We might have caught one man, but what if there's more? What if someone helped him, or is still out there watching? The cold truth sank into her bones. Hillcrest's nightmare might not be finished, and the shadows in the forest weren't done whispering. The cabin discovery sent a fresh chill through the Hillcrest Police Department. For 30 years, everyone had believed Martin Kane worked alone. Now, one scribbled message, he wasn't alone, opened a terrifying door. Detective Lawson sat in her office, staring at the metal box recovered from the cabin. She had gone through every page, every torn article, every note. One page stood out, a hand-drawn map. Faded lines showed trails through the forest. One trail was marked with a red X. Next to it, 2 sets of initials, MK and RD. Lawson's pulse quickened. MK is Kane, but who is RD? She pulled out old files, yearbooks, and reports from 1990, flipping through them until her fingers were sore. Then she found it. Raymond Decker, a maintenance worker at Hillcrest High School in the late 80s. Quiet, shy, no family listed. He had left town a year before the girls vanished, or so everyone thought. But Lawson found no records of him leaving. No job history, no address. It was like he disappeared, on purpose. She dug deeper. Then she found something terrifying. An old photograph of the school staff from 1989. In the background behind the gym stood Martin Kane. Next to him, a man with a blank expression and cold, watchful eyes. Raymond Decker. The connection was real. Lawson ordered a search through national records. Nothing. Then she checked something else. The hunting license registry. Raymond Decker had bought a license under a false name just 5 years ago. The address? A rural cabin 2 hours north of Hillcrest. Lawson called her team. Gear up. We're heading out. If Decker is alive, we need to find him before he disappears again. As they drove through winding roads and quiet fields, a nervous silence filled the vehicle. Every officer could feel it. The story wasn't over. The van, the cellar, the notebook, the carvings. All of it may have only been part of the truth. Because if Raymond Decker had been there, in the shadows, he had watched everything. And if he was still alive, he might still be watching. The sky turned gray as Detective Lawson's team arrived near the northern woods. Trees stood like silent giants, casting long shadows across the winding trail. At the end of a narrow dirt road stood the cabin, small, leaning slightly, and surrounded by overgrown weeds. Lawson raised her hand. Stay sharp, she whispered. Guns drawn, they approached slowly. No sound, no movement, only the creak of the wind against the roof. The front door was unlocked. Lawson pushed it open. The inside smelled like damp wood and old smoke. A single chair sat in the corner, a rusted stove in the other. Cobwebs draped over broken furniture like curtains. But what caught their attention was the wall. It was covered in photos. Some were old, yellowed at the edges. Others were newer, printed from cheap ink. All of them were of girls, some from Hillcrest, some unknown. In the center of the wall was a photo of the Hillcrest volleyball team, the same picture that had once hung in the school hallway. Beneath it, a sticky note read, "They never should have laughed at him." Lawson's blood ran cold. This wasn't just a hideout. It was a shrine, a dark, twisted museum of obsession. A sudden noise, a creak, made everyone freeze. "Back room!" one officer shouted. They rushed in, empty. A small bed, an oil lamp, a wooden chest at the foot of the bed. Inside the chest were journals, receipts, and a driver's license. The name Raymond Decker. But the photo was older, different, like someone had changed identities more than once. Lawson grabbed a recent receipt. It was for canned food, bought just 3 days ago. "He was here," she said. "Not long ago." Outside, her radio crackled. "Ma'am, we found fresh tracks behind the cabin, heading west toward the river." Lawson's jaw tightened. He was on the move. They had come so close, and he had slipped away, again. But now they had his name, his face, his pattern, and they knew one terrifying truth. Raymond Decker had helped Caney. He was part of the horror, and now he was out there, somewhere, still running, and maybe still hunting. Rain poured down as night fell over the forest. The search for Raymond Decker had begun. Detective Lawson stood beside her SUV, soaked but focused. The muddy trail behind the cabin showed clear footprints heading toward the river. Whoever made them was moving fast and knew the woods well. She radioed her team. "Search Grid C. Check every trail and cabin within a 10-mile radius. We're not losing him again." Meanwhile, back at the station, forensic techs sorted through everything found in Decker's cabin. One officer, Perez, came running with a new discovery, a torn page from a notebook. Lawson read it under the light of her flashlight. "M watches. I clean up. He says the girls are too loud. Says they ruin everything. I don't like the sounds they make when they cry." She froze. M. Martin Kane. "I clean up." That meant Decker wasn't just an observer. He was a participant. More than that, he was the cleaner, the one who made sure no one found the truth. Lawson's heart pounded. She turned to her team. "This isn't just about escape. If he thinks we're close, he might destroy more evidence. Or worse, hurt someone else. The forest was vast, but the river narrowed it. Decker would follow the water. He needed supplies, shelter, maybe even help. The next morning, a hunter called in from a nearby fishing cabin. He had seen a man, dirty, limping, sneaking into the woods with a backpack. The hunter snapped a photo from a distance. Lawson looked at the image. It was grainy, but clear enough. It was him. Raymond Decker was alive, and now she had proof. She ordered helicopters, dogs, and drones. This wasn't just a cold case anymore. It was a manhunt, but deep inside, Lawson feared what they might find when they caught him. She feared what he might say, or not say, because monsters like him didn't cry or confess. They watched, they waited, they disappeared. And sometimes, they came back. Hillcrest had found peace once, but peace is a fragile thing, and Decker was the shadow trying to break it. The air was thick with tension as officers spread across the forest. Helicopters circled above. K-9 units sniffed through underbrush. Flashlights cut through the misty morning haze like swords of light. Detective Lawson stood at the edge of the river where Decker was last seen. Every instinct in her body screamed that he was close. But this time, she wasn't just chasing him. She was setting a trap. "Leave the old fishing cabin unguarded," Lawson instructed. "Make it look abandoned. We'll pull back and watch from the ridge." Her plan was simple. Decker was injured, hungry, and tired. He would return to where he felt safe, the cabin he'd used before, and when he did, they'd be waiting. The team took positions. Hours passed, then just before sunset, a twig snapped in the distance. A figure moved slowly through the trees, tall, thin, limping. Raymond Decker. He crept toward the fishing cabin like a ghost. He stopped, looked around. Then, cautiously, he slipped inside. Lawson whispered into her radio. "Team 2, hold. Team 3, move around back. We go in on my signal." They waited. 10 long, breathless minutes. Then, "Go!" They stormed the cabin. Decker spun around, startled, but it was too late. Officers surrounded him, guns drawn. He didn't resist. He just stared at Lawson, eyes cold and hollow. Then he smiled. "I wondered when you'd find me," he said calmly. "Took you long enough." Handcuffs clicked around his wrists. "You're under arrest for the kidnapping and murder of the Hillcrest girls," Lawson said firmly. Decker didn't flinch. As they dragged him out, he looked back at the cabin. "They were just kids," Lawson said, her voice shaking with anger. "They were loud," he whispered. "Too loud." Lawson's hands clenched. He showed no remorse, no guilt, only emptiness. At the station during interrogation, he gave short, strange answers. Most were lies. Some were chilling truths. "Yes, I helped Caney. Yes, I watched. No, I didn't kill them. Yes, I heard them scream." Lawson stared at him through the glass, fists clenched. The nightmare was almost over, but the pain, the scars, the fear, that would take much longer to fade. Tomorrow she would face the families. Tonight she had finally captured the shadow. The courtroom was silent as Raymond Decker entered in chains. Families of the Hillcrest girls filled the benches, some holding pictures, others clutching each other's hands. Myra's parents sat in the front row, her notebook held tightly between them. Detective Lawson stood in the back, her eyes on Decker. The trial was swift. Evidence from the cabin, the torn journal page, DNA from the root cellar, Myra's notebook, the carvings, witness statements, Decker's quiet confessions. It was enough. The judge delivered the sentence: life in prison without parole. Decker didn't speak. He simply stared ahead, emotionless, as if he wasn't there at all. But the families were, and so were their memories. After the trial, the town of Hillcrest gathered at the old high school gym. The lights were dim, and candles lined the bleachers. A large banner hung above the court. "We remember the 9. Photos of the girls were displayed, laughing, smiling, full of life. For the first time in decades, their story had been told completely. Not just the horror, but the courage, the friendship, the fight to survive, and the voice that never gave up. Myra Thompson. Her notebook had been placed in a glass case in the school library, now called the Myra Room, where students could read her words and learn about strength, hope, and bravery. Lawson stood at the edge of the gym, watching the candles flicker. One of Myra's old teammates, now a grown woman, walked up to her. "You found her," she whispered. "You gave them back to us." Lawson nodded. "She never gave up. Even in the dark, she left us a way to find her." That night, as the moon rose over Hill Crest, something felt different. The forest was still there, silent and vast. The old trails, the shadows, the echoes. They would always remain, but now so would the truth. The story had been buried for 30 years, but in the end, it had been unearthed by courage, carried by a girl with a pen and a will to live. And as long as her words lived on, so did she, in the quiet, in the light, in the hearts of all who remembered. The Hillcrest Nine were gone, but never forgotten. Thank you for watching. Please stay tuned for more heartwarming discovery stories, and don't forget to subscribe.